All right, guys, welcome back to the Pocket Matt channel. It's Matty here, and today I'm going to tell you which decks are the best meta decks that you should be playing currently in Pokemon Pocket. We do it every Friday. Everyday Wonders released early last week, and we're basically coming into the second week of this new season. And that being said, things, were very crazy at the beginning of this season. These new cards came in. A lot of them seemed really strong because they were, and it really shook up the metagame. But now at this point, after a little bit of time, I think the dust has settled, and the metagame is looking to be pretty much what it will be, at least for the next week or two. There's going to be some minor adjustments, but, the decks that are going to be doing well this season, generally speaking, are doing well currently. So I think that the data that we have so far is very useful, and we should be able to determine which decks that you should be playing. I think ranked starts up next week, so this information should be relevant leading into ranked battles. But of course, the ranked meta is going to be a little bit different, so we'll cover that in a specific video next week. However, PMPT number 38, Whimsical Wonders, is this upcoming weekend. It's in fact tomorrow, Saturday, July 11th. So link to register down in the description below. Definitely come and play this weekend. It's going to be a ton of fun. We will be live streaming the entire tournament. So very cool. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We're almost at 50K subscribers. Now let's get right into it, all right? In no particular order, we have 7 of the top meta decks that I would be choosing right now, as well as a weekly wild card, which I find to be very interesting. So let's dive right into it, guys. The first one is going to be Mega Sceptile. Now, this is a bit of a changed Sceptile Greninja deck. I think that Butterfree Sceptile is quite strong. The quick growth Butterfree Caterpie package is really good, and it's really great support for almost any grass type deck out there. However, the metagame is definitely in an interesting spot. If you're going to be playing the Butterfree deck, you're going to have to be worrying about certain things, just like the Blaziken fire type decks, which with cast form can really put a damper on your entire Butterfree strategy. There's also certain things in the game that, are able to deal 80 damage, like on turn 2, to KO your Metapod. So there's quite a few reasons why I think that the Greninja version in general is still stronger than the Caterpie Butterfree version, but this is going to be slightly changed. This is a slightly changed version. No Chingling in this list. We are playing the new Fur Coat Furfrou, and this is the new one where you flip 2 coins. This card is phenomenal. I said it as soon as the set released. I think this Furfrou should find its way into so many different deck lists. It's just phenomenally strong. This deck list is going to be built almost exactly like the Blaziken deck is built, because they're effectively the exact same deck. One's just grass type and one's fire type. And I think both of them are some of the best decks in the entire game. Now, I know people are definitely tired of all of the Greninja stuff and throwing Greninja in non-water type decks, and I totally do understand it, but you got to keep in mind, Juliana, when paired with, a stage 2 Mega in Greninja, is phenomenally consistent, and it has upgraded the deck to a pretty significant degree. So we're playing 1 Froakie, 1 Greninja, 1 Pheromosa, 1 Furfrou. The Pheromosa and Furfrou are definitely like your lead-off Pokemon, but Trico is not terrible either. Small Balloon is a great card in so many of these deck lists because we have 4 different basic Pokemon, but we have a total of 5 basics, so no matter what you lead with, you should be able to get it free retreat pretty consistently. Rocky Helmet for extra damage, and again, Greninja is going to be one of the premier Pokemon throughout this entire season, and it has been in the previous seasons, but honestly, I think a lot of the top decks in the game right now are either playing Greninja or Chien-Pao. Chien-Pao, of course, is going to be in more water-type decks. The upside to Greninja is you don't have to play it in a water-type deck, so I think inherently it does have that benefit, but bench damage is still the #1 way to go. We do not have a consistent enough counterplay to it. Yes, Protect Poncho does exist, but you not only have to find it, but also Field Blower is also a card, right? So even if you are playing Protected Poncho, you're just never generally completely safe from the Greninja stuff. And again, this core package here, the Greninja with Juliana as, rare candy stage 2 Mega deck, theoretically should be good for any, stage 2 Mega Pokemon that comes out in the future, right? And I think that it's going to be one of those things that we really have to keep our eye on. Now, I don't know if they're going to be able to implement something to truly counterplay those Chien-Pao / Greninja cards, because they really are just the best cards in the game. Having the flexibility to deal damage to the bench is inherently the strongest thing that you could possibly play. There are other strategies that don't necessarily rely on this, but this is certainly one of the better things that you can be doing, so a lot of decks are going to be doing it. Anyway, this is what I believe the top Sceptile deck will look like this season, and yet again, it's less dependent on not hitting into fire-type matchups, which is why I think the Butterfree version is still strong, but the Butterfree version also doesn't have bench damage, right? So being able to play Pheromosa and Greninja with Cyrus and whatnot, it just adds up to be a bit more of a consistent consistent win condition. Sceptile in general has been very popular this season. One of the big reasons why I think Dark-type decks have struggled pretty tremendously, and it's something that we have to definitely keep our eye on this entire season, is because Grass decks have been super popular, and I really don't know if there's going to be that much room for Dark-type decks to enter back into the metagame. However, maybe, we'll have to wait and see, but I don't have any Dark-type deck spoiler on this video in today's list. But shout out to Sceptile Greninja. And next up is going to be Miraidon Magnezone. I do think this is the best like pure lightning type deck in the game still. Not only is this the most played deck this season, but it's one of the highest win rates as well. So when you take a look at all of the decks available, you know, Turbo Miraidon, right, with double Magnetone, double Zero Aura, is phenomenally strong. It's just one of these decks that's always going to win. It made it to finals last weekend. It's won multiple tournaments this season. I don't really think this deck is going to go anywhere anytime soon. It's also somewhat flexible, right? Because you can play the Magnezone Miraidon package with Oricorio if Oricorio were to be, you know, predominantly relevant. Anything that is weak to lightning is just going to get absolutely pushed out of existence by this deck list. And again, it's going to continue to be super strong. Mirror Shot Magnezone is broken. This is a deck that can deal with Oricorio decks pretty well. It's also super fast paced, but also in the late game, your Miraidon has the potential to one-hit KO any Pokemon. So this is a deck that can kind of do it all. The only thing we're missing here is, of course, the bench damage, right? So you have to be an exceptional deck list just all around the board if you're going to bypass kind of the bench damage capability threshold that, you know, is really on the metagame, at least this season. So nothing else to really say too much about this. It's still the same deck list. This is just the list that people are playing. There are some decks that aren't playing double Miraidon. In general, I do think playing double Miraidon, double Zero Aura, like, is probably the best way to win games, just because, like, getting that turn 2 Miraidon out with like 80 or 100 damage, like, is fundamentally one of the stronger things in the entire game. So this is a very consistent way of doing that. And yeah, I mean, that's how I feel here. There is an Oricorio deck that we're going to talk about here next, because Oricorio is relevant. In fact, you know, we'll get there. But anyway, yeah, Miraidon Magnezone, it's still good. And in fact, I think if you're playing in tournaments or if ranked comes out, this is still going to be one of your better options. And, you know, water type decks are becoming increasingly more popular. You know, Milotic is popular, and Suicune and, you know, Chien-Pao and Baxcalibur are also very popular. So it's very interesting to me. I think in terms of like the general strength in Pokemon Pocket right now, I actually think the water type decks are just the best decks in the game, especially when you factor in that Lightning is the most played deck, but those water type decks have some of the highest win rates, right? It's kind of crazy when you think about it like that. It's just the way it goes right now. The water type stuff has been buffed so much, and so is Lightning. So those are really the two premier typings, in my opinion, currently in Pokemon Pocket. But let's talk about, you know, the next kind of pseudo Lightning type deck, which is going to be the Oricorio Giratina Indeedee deck list. Because, you know, out of all of the decks that we're covering in today's video, this deck actually has the highest average win rate. Now, this to me is basically the new version of that like hard win, you know, hard counter, like sustain type strategy that we used to see with things like Steelix or Guzzlord. And these were decks that, you know, oftentimes did struggle with Oricorio to a degree, but almost like automatically won certain strategies when they got set up, because there just wasn't a way to get around, you know, the unkillable wall. Now, this deck list has the same principle, except it's Oricorio as the wall, which effectively does make a lot of sense. And I thought about why this deck list suddenly became relevant this season. It has seen a little bit of play throughout the previous seasons, but this season particularly, it has become extremely popular, and again, has the highest average win rate out of any deck that we're talking about today. So why is that? At the end of the day, I think that there's a lot of decks, and I think a lot of different archetypes have really settled on, okay, you know, we have non-EX Pokemon, so we should be able to just sort of get through Oricorio. And in a traditional sense, if you're just playing, you know, 1 or 2 Oricorio in a deck that doesn't play a lot of healing or doesn't play a lot of HP buffing, like, sure, you can get around the Oricorio and it's not that big of a problem. However, this deck list has the ability to buff Oricorio up to 110 HP and heal it for effectively full HP every single turn. So the only way that you're going to be able to consistently get around this Oricorio stuff, in this deck list at least, is to have a non-EX Pokemon that can hit, you know, at least 90 or 110 HP, which, to be fair, there's not that many of them. And one of the biggest factors to me that is allowing this particular strategy to become so common and so good this season is because we're not seeing a lot of Hydreigon. It is one of the weird things. Now, I'm a big, you know, proponent of like, hey, I think Oricorio was good for the metagame, but this deck list goes a bit too far, right? And again, like if you look at most decks in the game, they are playing at least 1 or 2 non-EX Pokemon that theoretically you could use to get around Oricorio, right? Just name the deck list. There's something out there in that deck that's going to be able to hit Oricorio, whether it's Baxcalibur, you know, whether it's Magnezone, whether it's Furfrou, whether it's Castform. Like there's so many different cards that are in all of these decks. Decks no longer these days are just built entirely like accounting for Oricorio, and I think that's a good thing. But even though those decks are accounting for Oricorio, they're not accounting for Starting Plains, Giant Cape, Double Indeedee, Lucky Ice Pop, right? So those same decks that are sort of, you know, being built to beat Oricorio are just no longer able to beat this Oricorio deck, so it's taking it a step further, and it is inherently a bit toxic. And honestly, I know this is a deck that no one's going to really want to play, but again, I had to mention it in today's video because it has been extremely dominant. It went 12-0 at a tournament earlier this week. It's got the highest average win rate. It is just sort of a hard win deck. Like if your opponent doesn't have anything to just like one-hit KO the Oricorio, you're probably not going to win. And that's just the inherent downside here to this deck list being in the metagame. However, it might position things like Hydreigon to come back in if this deck becomes popular enough. Or, you know, if you're just playing another strategy, right, that you can want to kill an Oricorio. A Magnezone can do it. It can hit for 90, but you got to get rid of their stadium because, you know, Giant Cape plus the stadium's 110. And even if they have 110 HP and you hit for 90, like they're probably just going to heal for 90 and then the process repeats. So you're in a tough spot either way. But yeah, I think this deck list is absolutely ridiculous. And the upside to it, and this is a deck that does play dual energies, the upside here is that, you know, if Oricorio isn't the #1 factor to win games, although it is the primary factor that this deck uses to win games, you can still deal a lot of damage with Indeedee and Giratina. And this deck, to me, like single-handedly has pushed a ton of decks kind of out of the metagame. You know, Gardevoir Diancie was a deck that in general sort of struggled with Oricorio, and you were a bit reliant on the Gardevoir, the non-EX Gardevoir to get it done, but this is not a deck you can beat playing that Gardevoir Diancie strategy. It's just not. Generally, you can't win. Like Butterfree's another example, right? Like Butterfree cannot beat this deck list because Butterfree just hits for 60, and then Oricorio heals for 60, and then you just can't win the game. So it's a really interesting deck that has hard countered a lot of the strategies that we're seeing currently in the metagame. You know, Vaporeon is another example of that. Although we did see Vaporeon beat this deck list, I think that the Vaporeon EX is a pretty big deal here so that you can just move around the Oricorio, but that also means you have to KO 1 in order to use Vaporeon EX's ability. So there's just so much stuff in the game that seemingly is able to deal with Oricorio, but not this version of Oricorio. And I think that this is actually going to be one of the more impactful decks throughout this entire season. It might be one of the more fundamental reasons why things like Magnezone and Hydreigon end up being some of the best options throughout the season. Now, the thing about this deck list is that even though it's an extremely hard counter to a lot of the top meta decks, it does lose to a lot of non-meta decks, which is pretty funny, right? Like anything that's just sort of a non-mega deck that you would see at the top 20 most played decks, like probably does beat this. Like Ursaluna could beat this easily. Like Puppy Pile could beat this. Like there's so many weird decks that aren't really considered to be top tier meta decks that could easily just walk through this. Like Hisuian Goodra is a good example, right? So there's so many weird things in the game that will 100% just stomp this deck list. But when you take a look at like the top 15 decks of the game, none of them really want to play this. And I find that to be very interesting. So here it is. It's going to have a major impact on the metagame. I know people don't really want to see this or hear about it, but I got to report it here in today's video. Next up, let's talk about Milotic. Milotic's kind of gone through a weird transition. This is the list that is becoming the most successful and the most popular, at least over the past week. And it is going to be Vaporeon Chien-Pao. However, people are kind of swapping to the Eevee EX instead of Boosted Evolution Eevee. I do find this interesting. However, I think that in general, if you do lead with Eevee, you'd rather just not get KO'd. And I think that's a big deal here. That coincidentally, the prize math for this deck list can be a little bit strange, right? Because you are reliant on Washout Vaporeon, and then you're pairing it with a bunch of 2-prize Pokemon. And Boosted Evolution Eevee was a really, it was a really easy target in this deck list, where if you didn't get the Vaporeon, then all of a sudden, like you had a 50 HP Pokemon that could just get KO'd for 1 prize very easily, and then all you had to do was just go through one of these EX Pokemon. So I think that's a core reason why we are playing Eevee EX. It also has a retreat cost of 1, so it's just in general like a bit harder to KO in the first turn of the game, and there's a lot of things that can KO, like I said, boosted evolution Eevee. So to me, that's sort of the biggest reason. In general, though, it's still like kind of the deck list that we've kind of come to know, at least so far this season. Field Blower makes sense because it's Chien-Pao. You don't want to get rid of those ponchos. We have a Giant Cape and an Elegant Cape, which I think Giant Cape is needed in this deck list to give your Chien-Pao 150 HP, or just more than 130, so you can't get reverse KO'd by Chien-Pao and whatnot. Trading Area, always really good here when we're playing Vaporeon and Milotic. And then, of course, just one Wallace in the deck because it is a very, very good card for consistency reasons. So I personally think Milotic will end up being the best new Pokemon throughout the season. Like I said, the Dark-type decks with Sableye really got pushed out early because of all of the Sceptile stuff coming around. And I think that's, you know, that makes sense. Like, yeah, that's just sort of, it like the Sableye Dark decks, whether it was Greninja or Oricorio or whatever it was, they were so popular and so dominant in the first few days of the season that they really did have a significant impact on which decks saw play moving forward. And that's why the Grass/Sceptile decks have been so popular this season, is because they came in to counterplay the most played deck immediately. And things have changed a lot since then, but Milotic doesn't have a lot of things that it's super worried about. Lightning isn't a great matchup here, but in general, Milotic is so useful. And I think as it turns out, you know, Chien-Pao might just be like the best water type card like in the game. I mean, it's not, but it's the best like water type attacking Pokemon, right? Because like Milotic provides a lot of support and a lot of value, but it's not necessarily, you know, the best attacker in the game. And it's the same with Suicune, right? To me, I think Suicune EX is the best EX card ever made. However, like you got to play it with something that can also like finish games. And Chien-Pao really is that Pokemon. This card is absolutely phenomenal. 130 to any bench Pokemon, or any Pokemon on the board rather, is incredible. It really is like the best way to finish games in all of Pokemon Pocket. So I think that the water type decks have a massive advantage right now with all of the energy acceleration available between Milotic and Baxcalibur and Chien-Pao. Again, no matter how you want to play water, Chien-Pao is sort of the cornerstone here. And again, I do think Milotic is also really strong. When you take a look at the win rates, Milotic is up there with Suicune. And to be fair, both of those decks are going to be right here in today's video. So here's the Milotic deck, but also here's Suicune and Chien-Pao with Baxcalibur. Still potentially a top 3 deck. I think I put this in the S tier on Tuesday's video, and then I put Milotic in like the A tier, like high A tier. And I do think Suicune's a bit better in the sense that it doesn't like, it doesn't have as much to go through. Like, I think this is more of a straightforward deck, but, you know, in the same turn, it's a bit more consistent. Like, when you're playing Suicune, you know you're going to draw double the cards. You have double Copycat. It's flying through the deck, and then you're pretty often able to get the Baxcalibur out, like, early enough to where you're always able to use Chien-Pao. And again, like into lightning stuff, like Suicune can be a little bit tough, but we are playing double Giant Cape with 140 HP Suicune. You know, for reference, this thing has the same amount of HP as Milotic, right? And you don't have to deal with the 30 HP Feebas. So like in general, Milotic is a really good card, but I think as Milotic came into the game, we took a look at Suicune and we realized just how broken this Pokemon is. Fundamentally, it's the GOAT. This is the best EX card ever printed. Suicune EX is incredible. You know, Baxcalibur Chien-Pao is just a great backline for Suicune. Still continues to be one of the best decks in the game, and probably the best deck we've ever seen. I know Suicune and Greninja had a lot of, you know, momentum for a while. It was like the top deck, but to be fair, I think when Chien-Pao and Baxcalibur came out, it really was just sort of the upgraded next phase version of Suicune. And it's funny because the water type decks don't even play Greninja. In fact, it's the non-EX decks or non-water decks that play Greninja. And I find that to be a very interesting progression. But yeah, Suicune Baxcalibur is going to be a top deck this season, probably a top 3 deck. Potentially the #1 deck, honestly. Like, when I take a look at the metagame, you know, I take a look at Suicune, Baxcalibur, and I take a look at, you know, Magnezone, Miraidon, and those to me feel like optimized, perfected, incredibly balanced, and not balanced, but like well-balanced decks that are just so good. They really are. It's going to be really tough for something to come into the game and do really well into both Suicune, Chien-Pao, and Magnezone, Miraidon. Like, that's going to be a really tough thing to contend with. Maybe Mega Rayquaza can do it, though. We'll have to wait and see at the end of this month. Next up, though, is going to be Blaziken. So, again, very, very similar, almost identical to the Sceptile deck. However, now we're a fire type. In general, I do think Sceptile is better. I think Sceptile is a better Pokemon than Blaziken. I'll just flat out say it. Now, Blaziken does have one advantage, which is that you're playing Fire-type energies, and you can play Fire-type Pokemon, which is going to be good into Sceptile. So that's the only upside here. And it's a weird dynamic, right? Like, would you rather play Sceptile, which is objectively, I think, better, Or would you play the deck that just is similar and less good, but is actually better into that head-to-head matchup? And it's quite strange. Here we're playing Heatmore instead of Pheromosa, and we're playing Castform instead of Furfrou. Now, I do think Castform is still relevant. I think that if you're going up against Sceptile, Castform is a really, really big deal. The 50 damage on your first turn can be incredible. Also a big reason why maybe people aren't playing Boosted Evolution EVs anymore. But yeah, it's a really good deck. I think Blaziken actually has ended up being a lot better than I thought it would be this season. And it's something that I have to recommend. Now, unfortunately, fire type decks haven't really grown too much beyond Blaziken. Charizard is somewhat decent. Again, I think the Charizard stuff is a little bit, it's run its course a bit. I think people understand Charizard's not bad. It just doesn't feel necessarily as good as you want it to. But the upside to Charizard, right, is that you can 1-hit KO stuff. And which is actually becoming increasingly more valuable as the season goes on. As it turns out, just being able to 1-hit KO Megas is a big deal. But yeah, Blaziken's good. To me, it's still the best fire type deck. And again, it's probably just because of the whole bench damage Greninja process thing going on. Juliana is one of the more interesting cards as it got put into the game. It really brought these stage 2 Mega Greninja decks to the next level. Before they were just, generally strong high roll decks, especially the Blaziken one. But now with Juliana, you can play Blaziken and Sceptile with Greninja and any other stage 2 Mega that might come along. You could easily play it with, of course, the Greninja. So it's Juliana's a crazy card, and its impact on the metagame has been very interesting. Some of the best decks over the last month or two have been, again, decks playing Juliana, which is quite interesting, if I'm being entirely honest with you. But anyway, that's Blaziken. That's the deck people are playing right now. And now, lastly, let's talk about Lucario, because Mega Lucario, to me, is actually like the biggest story. I think this is the deck that is very uniquely positioned across the entire metagame. Sock is a really good card. Sock is a good card because it can get boosted, of course, with Rocky Helmet and Karina and Arena of Antiquity, but it can hit through certain effects, and that's a very, very big deal. Again, Brick Break, Sock plus Fighting Coach Lucario can 1-hit KO an Oricorio. We have the Hitmonlee bench damage. The one thing to me that really still separates Lucario above almost anything else in the game is that it has that a little bit of extra reach, which is really important, right? When you take a look at the breakpoints across many of the decks, right? Especially like the lightning decks as well as the water decks, which I said before are like the top decks of the metagame. Those are all like 140 HP Pokemon that extend their HP just a little bit beyond that, right? Because 140 is a number that a lot of Pokemon can't hit. Like Sceptile can hit it, Blaziken can hit it. So 140 is an interesting number, but Milotic has 140, Miraidon has 140, Suicune has 140, Chien-Pao has 130, like Indeedee and Giratina, like those are Pokemon around that range. I know Giratina I think is 150, but it's just an important number. And if you take a look at most of the best decks in the game, they're kind of capped out at that much damage. There's not many things in the game that can hit above 140, at least that easily. And Lucario is one of them. Lucario is one of the few Pokemon that, just inherently speaking, is almost always going to hit you for that 160 plus number. And it's very valuable. It's not only really good because you can KO some of those basic Megas like Sableye and whatnot, but you can KO the non-Mega EX Pokemon, things like Suicune, like Chien-Pao, like Giratina, like Indeedee, like Milotic. There are so many examples, like so many of those Pokemon at the top of the metagame, like really don't want to run up against Lucario because all of a sudden it's turn 3, maybe you went first, Lucario comes in and you're gonna get KO'd and there's nothing you can really do about it, right? And one thing I really like about this deck is it's all single prize Pokemon paired with a 3-prize Pokemon. So the prize math really works out. And again, when I take a look at the metagame and I see that Psychic type decks are seeing less and less play, the only thing remotely holding Lucario back at the beginning of the season was in fact that Psychic type stuff with Gardevoir and Diancie, which was again a big threat to Lucario. Those decks really don't see that much play at the moment. They really couldn't hold up with the rest of the other decks in the metagame, and that's why we're not talking about Psychic today. Now, Altaria could come back into the metagame. Altaria is a different story. I would not be surprised if Altaria entered back in. However, Lucario is actually primed and ready to be very, very strong into most of those top meta decks. Also being a fighting type deck in general is good into Lightning, and as we know, Lightning is the most played deck right now, but it's also good into the water stuff. It's good into Milotic, it's good into Suicune, so I really like Lucario. I think it is still, and even more so maybe this season than the previous seasons, probably one of your best options, and I find that to be kind of crazy, but that's the truth. Lucario is the truth, kind of the breakpoint god. This man can just hit numbers. He just does damage. I'll tell you what, like, people always talk about all these different effects and values and all these different things that make up a deck, but at the end of the day, just being able to KO your opponent's Pokemon and deal the damage is the most important factor. Like, that's how you win games. is by KOing Pokemon like that, you know what I mean? So Lucario does that. It does that quite well. And kind of, you know, extra reach and just extra damage is what this new fighting type kind of archetype does in this new era of Pokemon Pocket. And Lucario is kind of the cornerstone of that. He's the mascot of fighting currently in Pokemon Pocket. Lastly, let's get into the weekly wild card, which is going to be an interesting one, but one that I actually really do like. It came from a recent tournament, so I forget who played this, but whoever was playing this deck, shout out to them. And it's Melmetal. That's right. Melmetal, I think the metagame is really sorely lacking a really solid steel type deck. I'm not saying Melmetal is going to be top tier meta. However, it does sort of make sense with the new Time Recall Celebi, right? You can evolve your Melmetal, and then there's a couple of things that have buffed this sort of Melmetal deck that we haven't really seen for a bit while, like Celebi, of course, really good, because then you can use the Amass attack with Meltan, and then if Melmetal gets evolved on turn 2, you can just Amass. And Melmetal has 170 HP, by the way. And we're actually playing it with Galarian Berserker, Kids Room, and Metal Core Barrier. So you're more consistently able to get your tool cards. Steel Apron is, of course, going to be a massive benefit. You know, Galarian Berserker should be able to hold its own right into different Oricorio decks, although the Indeedee one is going to be a tough one to get around for sure. But yeah, Melmetal's been an interesting, you know, definitely not a terrible Pokemon, like for a very long time. It's been a while since I've seen Melmetal. Somebody brought it back. They updated the deck a little bit. Galarian Berserker, Metal Core Barrier, Kids Room, Lucky Ice Pop, Celebi. This is a deck you don't really want to run into. I'll be honest with you. And I actually think that Celebi's really important to Melmetal because one of the interesting things about Melmetal was that you kind of wanted to play Memory Light. That way you could evolve and not get KO'd and then still generate those energies to you with the Melton's Amass attack. However, you also really needed those tool cards like Metal Core Barrier to keep Melmetal alive. And inherently, this is a 2-prize deck, so now you have to go through double Melmetals. This is a very interesting deck. I don't know if it's like the craziest thing in the world, but I wanted to highlight it because it was unique. I haven't really talked about Melmetal in a very long time, and this deck list not only did well at a recent tournament, but it was a really cool deck, so I wanted to highlight it here as the weekly wild card. I thought it would be a perfect weekly wild card. Try it out. Let me know what you guys think. Very, very cool deck list. And yeah, there you go, guys. It's been a fun metagame. It's been a fun meta. I know that this season, this set, Everyday Wonders, isn't the most popular thing among Pocket players. I think a lot of Pokemon Pocket players, like a lot of them, are saving up their hourglasses and they're waiting until, you know, the B4 set with Mega Rayquaza. So I think that the amount of people playing the game currently is definitely a little bit lower, but I think that a lot of people will be coming back for the Mega Rayquaza set. And what's interesting is that shortly after B4 and Mega Rayquaza, we're going to be going into the C series, which is crazy to think about, that we've been doing this for that long, but I'm really excited about it. And I really do like this season. Again, I wish more people were participating, but this ranked season should be pretty interesting. So stay tuned for that. Stay tuned for, you know, the tournament coverage into next week. Tune into the tournament live stream this weekend for PMPT number 38. And of course, ranked starts up next week. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that. Just a couple of weeks until we actually get the entire like Rayquaza set, you know, kind of announced and officially revealed and teased. Like that'll be a very interesting week leading up to the B4 release. So I'm really excited about it. But anyway, guys, there you go. Peace out. Have a good one. We'll see you guys later. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget, by the way, go register for PMPT number 38. And yeah, we'll catch you guys next time. Bye.